Extreme efforts were necessary to be able to spread the word that by 7 a.m. the fire outbreaks were put out inside the turbine hall and the internal rooms of the power unit. The first estimation of the scope of the damages was identified. The personnel were evacuated from the areas of danger. The broken electric cables were detached. The major emergency power supply scheme was restored. The necessary equipment was put into operation. More than 100 tons of turbine oil were pumped into the external tanks and its combustion was prevented. The explosive hydrogen was expelled from the generators, and the electrolysis plant for hydrogen production was disconnected. The accident was contained. Power Unit 3 was shut down. By the morning of April 26th, the personnel of the Occupation Health and Safety Department had already carried out the first measurements of radiation contamination in the turbine hall and installed warning signs. The maximum rate of the equivalent dose between turbine generators, 7 and 8, was 50 to 70 Roentgen per hour. The extreme efforts were hard for personnel of the fifth shift. The power men worked until they were changed by the shift or specialists called for emergency responses. Many of them were transported to the medical unit due to their critical health conditions. At 10 a.m. on April 26 in Pripyat Medical Unit number 126, there were more than 100 people who had suffered different severity of exposure. The men with the most severe conditions were prepared to be moved to Boryspil in order to be transported to Moscow Clinic number 6. Some were transported to Kiev, but many of them got a little better and were sent home by themselves in order to continue working after sleeping. At noon, I walked past the Pripyat Cafe. I heard one and then a second ambulance arrive. My acquaintances worked in the hospital, and they told me that almost all of the night shift workers were in the hospital on the second floor. When I came to the hospital, the men from the shift told me it seemed they would be transported to Boryspil. Why Boryspil? Nobody knew. First problems appeared in the medical unit on the morning of April 26th. It was necessary to admit and accommodate the radiation-exposed people. In terms of pure psychology, it was a very difficult task because people were vomiting, fainting, and so on. All the organizational work of accommodating and transporting the exposed people was taken by the deputy head of town executive committee, Alexander Yasolov. He took the people to Boryspil by bus, and then they were taken by airplane to Moscow to clinic number 6. On April 26 in the morning, shift number 2 came to work. The view of power unit number 4's destroyed building shocked many people. But within these first few difficult hours, there were no cowards at Chernobyl NPP. All of the employees of Chernobyl NPP fulfilled their tasks set for them. My shift was number 2. This was the shift following the fifth one. I came to work at 8 in the morning and imagined the consequences of all that I observed going past power unit number 4. There were no walls on the unit, no shielding. The reactor was naked. When we arrived, almost all of the shift 5 personnel were evacuated from the power plant. Our shift had to cope with the first and second generation of the chemical shop. We started to pump out all of the chemically demineralized water that had stored in the first generation of the buildings to the premises of power units 3 and 4. When this water was finished, both potable water and fire piping came into play. Chemical shop personnel laid out the hoses outside the premises of Generation 2 pure condensate tanks. On the morning of April 26th, it didn't matter if you had a senior or lower position. The entire department worked as health physicists. Everybody conducted radiological reconnaissance. Everybody knew what they could do. But there were isolated cases of radiophobia. People are different. On April 26th in the afternoon, the USSR KGB sent the first secret report of the explosion at GNPP. On April 26th of this year at 1:25 a.m. on the premises of the 4th Power Unit during its shutdown for the scheduled midlife repair and testing of turbine generators 7 and 8, an explosion occurred, and a fire broke out which spread to the roof of the 3rd Power Unit. As a result of the explosion, the hipped roof reactor 4 and turbine hall were destroyed. During the accident, there were 17 plant shift employees on the premises. 9 of them were hospitalized, 4 of them are critically ill, and 1 is in intensive treatment unit. The fire has been contained. The radiation within the power plant area is 20 to 26 microRöntgen per second. The Pripyat River is 4 to 14 microRöntgen per second. Due to the accident, power unit 3 was shut down. Power units 1 and 2 are in normal operation. The power plant has been cordoned off. By morning, it was decided that all radiation dosage meters with a scale of up to 100 Röntgen are to be submitted for verification to make sure they work properly. The remaining radiometers were good enough only to be used for the low power radiation and showed overshoot everywhere. On that day, almost all repair workers became health physicists. Almost all. We worked inside the power plant perimeter, monitoring people and vehicles. I, for one, participated in the first mapping of the industrial site. Together with health physicist Nepiushi, we determined the safe routes to remove people from staff amenity buildings too. We worked all day until midnight. At 6 a.m., Vladimir Babich, a power unit shift supervisor, was on duty in the power unit control room 4. At 8 a.m., his place was taken by shift supervisor Viktor Smagin, who came for a shift. It is he who gave the command, everyone must evacuate power unit 4. Smagin himself didn't last long because of the health problems, vomiting, vertigo, headache, and a subconscious state. He was changed at 1 p.m. by power unit leading control engineer Alexei Braus. Until the shift's handover, Braus was in power unit control room 4 practically all by himself. He filled the deaerators with pure condensate pumps, switching off unnecessary equipment and intermediate circuit pumps. He performed the transfer of service water pumps by himself. By 4 p.m. the day shift had arrived, and the shift to power unit control room 4 was handed over to shift supervisor Yermakov. It should be remembered that in the morning and afternoon of April 26th, the first and second power units were still operating at a nominal capacity. There were no comments relating to any faults of their operation. But the reactor rooms of power units 1 and 2, the warning sign indications of the radiation monitoring system confirmed the enhanced radiation background. The staff worked wearing a pedal-type respirator mask. We arrived for our shift at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We changed clothes but did not come to the power unit 3 control room right away. Is it impossible to say that the radiological reconnaissance was completed, but the data on our route was available? The power plant shift supervisor determined the main working place at power unit control room 2. It was there that the shift was handed over. It is necessary to get involved very quickly as power unit 3 cooldown mode was underway. From time to time I went to power unit control room 3 and monitored the equipment condition. I remembered there were major leaks in the reactor room. That's why a lot of urgent orders were given. The access to the power unit was limited for shop staff and operational staff. Engineers and operators were sent to the local control panels to carry out the urgent orders, who switched off and monitored equipment of power unit 3. I don't remember it all now, but we had a lot of work. I took over the shift on the 26th at 4 in the afternoon. I worked 8 hours fulfilling orders to meet the situation and equipment condition. The actions of the thermal instrumentation and control chemical and electrical shop personnel remained in the shadows of the events of the reactor and turbine shops. But the chemical and electrical shop staff were in great demand that night. With fire and radioactive water flowing, the electricians ensured power supply for an in-house load of the power plant and power output units 1 and 2, which were still in operation. At dawn, I ran for a second time to the outdoor switchgear. It was urgent to handle the situation with a transformer. We called a vehicle for high-rise operation. I remember there was a young repairman in our shift. He had to pick off a broken wire from the tower. Gritsenko, the open switchgear section supervisor, did not let this kid do it and completed the operation by himself. There was strong radiation streaming from the destroyed reactor. The wire was taken from the tower, the equipment was switched on, and only then the standby power supply was provided to the power plant. Gritsenko, as a result, had acute radiation syndrome. He was taken to the hospital. Now he is alive, but walks with crutches. He lives in Kyiv. Early in the morning, a head foreman called and summoned my father and me to work in the emergency response team. I worked in the same section as my father, so we arrived at the power plant. Shift electric fitters restored serviceability of the standby transformer at 10 a.m. on April 26th. A voltage of 6 kilovolts was supplied to the distributing gear of power unit 4. Following a rather complicated and large-scale switching associated with voltage for the power unit, including lighting in the intact premises of Power Unit 4, the functionality was restored. Early in the morning, we were informed that the personnel of the electric power system terminated service to Pripyat electrical substation. The CNPP electrical shop employees urgently took up this substation, servicing and sending the most experienced and responsible specialists there. These CNPP employees ensured the voltage of the power plant and Pripyat town loads were per regular or temporary procedure. Everything needed electrical power. We urgently laid temporary lines, and when the cable channels were submerged, it was necessary to rearrange them and the standby power supply too. A lot of work needed to be done. We coped with it one way or another. And the fire alarm had to be restored urgently. It was submerged and the insulation was absent. Electricity does not like water. It was necessary to wipe, dry, and set up fans in a prompt manner. We had too much work. The guys were doing great. They passed through hell. Yes, they met the challenge and won, but the price of the victory appeared to be very high. Dozens of electricians had to leave their employment temporarily or permanently for health reasons. When I was going home from my shift in the morning, I saw debris for the first time. Usually we were taking home past the outdoor switchgear, but that morning we passed the construction base the other way around. That was when we saw the destroyed power unit. We arrived in Pripyat, and the town was going about its life as if nothing had happened. You should understand what I mean. It was Saturday. People were going to the market, walking out with children. I remember I could not contain myself and went up to one mother with a child and said, "Return home. Don't walk out in the streets. It's not safe." I don't think she understood me. By that time, nobody had officially informed the residents of Pripyat on anything, but the water sprinkler trucks were already washing the streets. On the night of April 26th, an emergency operations center was formed in Pripyat militia unit. The power plant was cordoned off. Patrols of militiamen literally followed in the footsteps of the firemen. By 7 in the morning, more than 1,000 employees of Politsky, Ivankiv, and Chernobyl National Traffic Safety Inspectorate District units came to the accident area. They reinforced patrols that transit militia were involved in at Yanov railway station. The patrol service was done not only by sergeants and sergeant majors, but also by colonels of the militia. They blocked the road to the power plant, but the militiamen, as well as the town authorities, did not inform people on what happened in reality. At the time of the Soviet Union, all information regarding the radiation situation was under wraps so much that even the power plant director could not disclose anything. And if such data needed to be submitted, it had to be double-checked several times. For this purpose, time was needed. The data was submitted in written form using a specially established scheme and under an appropriate security label. Vitaly Perminov, the spectrometry laboratory head, came within a day shift and took samples of water and smears of the fallout in the area close to Power Unit 4. And only after midnight, following the spectrometer data, it became clear that the measurements demonstrated the presence of fuel fission products. And 17% of the activity was due to neptunium. It was unambiguously proven that the destruction of the reactor core and fuel emission into the atmosphere. The particles of nuclear fuel were present in all samples. The spectrometry data were reported to Lutov, then to Bruhanov and Parashin. But hundreds of builders and fitters from CNPP construction department and contracting organizations that worked at the construction of power units 5 and 6 went to work in the morning on April 26th. There were no buses. Almost all builders went on foot. As a rule, the large, heavyweight equipment was installed at night or on days off. We had to start the installation of Power Unit 5 reactor exactly on the 26th of April. And as the production technology department head, I had to be present. I went, as usual, on foot to the Amenities Building 3, and the militia didn't let me go any further. The builders and fitters did not work on this day. After long meetings, the top managers of the construction and installation multi-corporate enterprise made a decision to give the employees the day off. In the morning of the 26th of April, a neighbor came to me and said that no transportation went to the power plant. Everything was blocked and the buses did not go to Chernobyl or CNPP. Only the tasks in the daily operating logs were in written form. From April 25th to May 1st, no orders were issued. Only in May were the orders issued to commend people for particularly challenging tasks in terms of accident mitigation at Power Unit 4. They are the documents that show how dangerous the work completed by the CNPP staff was. The condition of Power Unit Reactor 4 was determined, taking pictures of the destroyed power unit was organized and carried out, spectrometric and neuron measuring was implemented, the operations for stopping certain reactors were performed, the radiological situation within the industrial site and in the immediate proximity to Power Unit 4 was identified. While all of the health physicists were busy on the industrial site, Istomin, the leader of the power plant dosimetry team, was instructed to detect the areas with tin Röntgen, to specify them and cordon them off. However, it was necessary to enter the areas with tin Röntgen in order to detect them. There wasn't any panic. The power plant personnel revealed those personality traits which nowadays are also identified with high moral quality and excellent stage-managed professionalism. In fact, almost all nuclear energy employees believed that they were fulfilling their professional duties. They believed they were doing what they should do according to instructions. At that time, I was Senior Control Engineer of Power Unit 3. That's why there were not any questions what to do. I was aware that the power unit was shut down, and it was necessary to do everything for its cooling down. The operations personnel do not need any orders to fulfill their official duties. You come, and you do. I believe that a professional should do everything to the full extent. At Sredmash, we were taught, it is better not to do work at all than to botch it so someone has to do it again. In everything associated with the quality of work, it was discipline. It was, it is, and it will be, in fact, semi-military type discipline. It was obvious from the slogans and declarations. The nuclear energy workers felt their own responsibility for the functioning of the expensive and complicated equipment, which was officially classified as extremely complicated operations at CNPP. They also understood this facility was a nuclear one. To take responsibility, to decide, and to implement. That is the way I understand. But before sending personnel to unknown places, a shop head, a shift supervisor, or a shop deputy head went to investigate themselves in the beginning. They went to investigate, evaluate the situation, and only then set tasks for personnel. Nobody even thought it was frightening or dangerous there. Everybody just worked. According to the order, personnel were forbidden to enter the RCAS premises, but some equipment they had to use was located there. In that situation, when nobody could be sent there, I needed to go myself to do the work. In the afternoon of the 26th of April, new fire teams arrived in Pripyat and pumped out the radioactive water from the submerged cable rooms into the cooling pond. The water activity within 22 square kilometer area achieved the 6th power of Curie per liter, so its activity was equal to the activity of the main loop water of the nuclear power unit under operation. This water caused a lot of problems for those who dealt with it. The personnel who did not wash or change their clothes on time were doomed to radioactive burns and acute radiation syndrome. Certainly there were floor drain systems which together coped with water, but later the water level rose and the radiation contamination that had gotten into the water from Power Unit 4 was life-threatening. We worked at A Block, at the so-called O3 pipe protection corridor. We pumped out the water that had penetrated after the firefighting. I adjusted drainage pumps. I always dealt with installation, pre-setting, and servicing the cool-down pumps during reactor shutdown cooling. That's why on this day, I was doing what I was good at. I was certainly not present at Power Unit 4 on the 26th of April, but at Power Unit 3, everything was carried out at a run. We moved strictly. Here we could move calmly. Here it was necessary to run quickly as there was radiation streaming. We entered through the room of the RSS shift supervisor where we took a device. The health physicist told us generally what we should pay attention to. We worked without the health physicist. We measured ourselves. And so nobody would be exposed once again. At noon, the Ukrainian KGB sent a second message for the USSR KGB. There are 112 people at the medical examination. The location of the senior reactor compartment operator, Hodimchuk, has not been identified. As of 1500, April 26th of this year, the radiation situation within the accident area is as follows. The gamma radiation in the immediate proximity of the accident center is up to 1000 microroentgen per second. Within the NPP area, up to 100. In some parts of Pripyat town, 2 to 4 microroentgen per second. The situation is under continuous monitoring. Directed by the party and Soviet bodies, the works for decontaminating roads, vehicles leaving the town are organized. The entrance and exit of private cars are limited. The meeting for heads and secretaries of party organizations of enterprises was held so they could explain the current situation to the public. Temporarily, the construction works of Power Unit 5 and 6 are suspended. Saturday, April 26 is declared a day off. Power Units 1 and 2 run normally. At the scene of the accident, Ukrainian KGB and KGB Directorate Operational Investigation Groups are working. Based on this, it is evident that even the KGB didn't have unbiased data on the radiation situation. At about 2 or 3 p.m., I ran to school. The school was closed. The children were not let out. At that moment, I understood something serious had occurred. But I had not paid attention in the morning that the vehicles were washed with chemical decontamination agents. On the morning of the 26th, I went to the laboratory of external dosimetry by myself. I came and asked what the situation was like. I was given a device and told to come out and check out the situation myself. I switched on the device and saw where it was always a normal level, the instrument read off scale. On the pathway that led to the external dosimetry building, there were 10 microroentgen per second. Within the working place, 0.8 was permissible. I came to the road, as much as 30 microroentgen per second, and vehicles that washed the road went along it from time to time. Following the report of Deputy Chief Engineer for Operation Sitnikov, the Chernobyl NPP director requested a permit for evacuation of Pripyat town from Moscow. However, Deputy Chairman of the USSR Council for Ministers Boris Shcherbina, with whom the director spoke on the telephone, gave a clear order. Don't push the panic. Don't start evacuation till the government commission arrives. I am from the military occupation, chemical and radiation reconnaissance, a platoon commander. That's why when I saw the destroyed top of the Central Hall building, I understood that further actions would be taken under radiation contamination conditions. The government commission arrived in Pripyat in the second half of the day. Upon arrival, the first thing that was organized was flying around the accident reactor by civil helicopter. On board, NPP photographer Anatoly Raskazov, Suez Atom Energo Chief Engineer Boris Prushinsky, and representative of RMBK Reactor Chief Designer, Power Engineering Research and Design Institute Konstantin Pulushkin. Only the pilot had a dosimeter that showed the radiation dose absorbed. From a height of 250 meters, they saw the destroyed reactor. There were graphite and fuel assembly pieces everywhere. The Block C roof, the turbine hall roof, the deaerator stack, on the asphalt around the power unit, even within the area of the 330 and 750 switchgears. It is necessary to say that we were not aware of the actual circumstances. Even the departed Sitnikov, why would they thrust themselves at the fourth reactor to see what happened? We did not realize it was a terrible neuron flux which killed immediately. During the day, town and district departments of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, along with town authorities, carried out great organizational work in the motor transportation establishments of Kyiv and the Kyiv region. In preparation for the population evacuation, 1,100 buses from almost all of the motor transport establishments of the Kyiv region were collected at Ivanikov's direction and were awaiting instructions. In Pripyat, the streets were washed all day long. Few people paid attention to the white foam at the side of the roads. Different people were informed of the accident at different times. By the end of the day, almost all of the town residents were aware of it. I had a lot of casual friends that worked at the power plant, including health physicists. Sometime closer to the end of the day, I was informed by my acquaintances about the dose rates that they had read from their instruments. It was clear it was not the full picture because those were separate measurements somewhere near the industrial site but not in the town. The health physicists weren't sent to the town. Even if the data was available, it was not official. However, based on the data, it was clear that the accident was very severe and evacuation appeared to be necessary. The nuclear fuel in the reactor of Power Unit 4 decayed within the expected time, and at approximately 8 in the afternoon when the new fire started. Firstly, the inner part of the power unit building top was illuminated from the inside with ruby red light, then flashes of light and fire which began to shoot out at irregular intervals, reaching heights from the base of the ventilation stack almost up to its top. The fire was so powerful that to extinguish it was out of the question. It was impossible to approach this fire, and indeed nobody tried to put it out. By the end of April 26, there were no firefighters at the power plant. The radioactivity carryover increased. At the points of measurement, the dose rates began to rise. Within 4 hours, the fire exposure dose rate in terms of gamma increased more than tenfold. The neurons were registered opposite the northern side of Power Unit 4. At 7 p.m., the first military unit of chemical protection arrived at Pripyat. They brought military-type devices for radiation measurement. By the evening of April 26, General Colonel Pikolov arrived at the Pripyat Town Committee of the Communist Party to command the units of newly arrived chemical troops. Mostly they were high-ranking officers. They were already aware of the radiation situation in the entire surrounding area. In other words, the power plant was more focused on the industrial site radiation and the chemical military units. And the meteorological office dealt with the dose rate reconnaissance in the town area and territories around it. By night, the data on the radiation situation was more or less reliable. It was even possible to forecast the situation changing. Based on such a forecast, it was clear that the situation was changing for the worse. Maybe it was due to the hydrometeorological parameters and the buildup effect. If more and more radioactive substances fall to the ground, they produce significant radiation background, and this background causes doses for the population. By approximately 8 p.m., the entire water inventory that was used for the power unit shutdown cooling had expired. The pumps that were launched by retrained electricians stopped. All the cable cellars from Power Unit 4 to Power Unit 1 were flooded with water. The transformer switched off due to short-circuit protection. The specialists from the Government Commission ordered to separate post-accident power units from intact ones in terms of power supply, water supply, and other distribution lines. Assistance in radiation reconnaissance was required from the chemical troops. We made an attempt to enter the turbine hall. A military-type dosimeter was given. I went somewhere along B row between the 5th and 6th machines. The instrument showed 70 Röntgen, and higher up to 100. The instrument's pointer swung. The radioactivity around the power plant grew drastically. The destroyed reactor continued to provide millions of Curie, and there was the entire spectrum of radioactive isotopes. Until the evacuation started, the radionuclides built up in the bodies of the people who were present within the area of direct visibility of the reactor, and those people were exposed to external gamma and beta radiation. Deputy Minister of Energy Gennady Shasharin, who came as part of the Government Commission, made a decision to shut down Power Units 1 and 2. The shutdown started at 9 p.m. I believe that all of the decisions that were made by the operations personnel within the first 24 hours of the 26th of April have to be studied worldwide, including by those who criticize the actions of the power plant staff. It is necessary to study how competent the personnel were who made the decisions. The shift carried out work perfectly. Certainly there were some drawbacks somewhere. But taking all things together, they performed work skillfully and in a professional way. Which systems had to be halted in which way, in which condition the equipment should have been maintained, and how to reduce the number of employees. I believe it all should be studied. Following the powerful fire at the power plant, which started on April 26th in the evening, almost 24 hours after the accident, and continued almost the whole night, the dosimetric situation in the town deteriorated drastically. The preparation works for the evacuation of the population were accelerated. The evacuation was shifted from 6 p.m. to 2 p.m. Somewhere closer to the end of the day, the chairman of the government commission, Shcherbina, made the decision that we would prepare for the evacuation.